Imagine giving birth in a cave with no medical assistance, knowing that your child has less than a 50% chance of surviving to their 5th birthday. Imagine teaching your toddler to recognize the sound of an approaching predator before they can even speak properly. This was the reality for prehistoric mothers, raising children in a world where death lurked around every corner, where a single mistake could mean the end of their bloodline. If you're curious about how our ancestors navigated the impossible challenge of raising children in prehistoric times, smash that subscribe button right now. We're just starting this channel and we need your support to grow. Also, drop a comment telling us the city you're watching from. We love to see how far these stories travel. 1 out of every 2 children born would never see their 5th birthday. For mothers who had already lost children, and most had, every pregnancy was a gamble with death, every birth a miracle if the child survived. They developed sophisticated strategies for keeping their children alive in a world that seemed designed to kill them. These weren't the gentle, nurturing approaches we associate with modern motherhood. They were harsh, pragmatic, and often heartbreaking methods, forged by necessity and perfected through countless generations of loss. Archaeological evidence shows that many births took place in caves or temporary shelters, often with only other women in the group to assist. The mother's survival rate was shocking. Many women died in childbirth, leaving newborns to be raised by other group members or to die alongside their mothers. They learned to identify signs of healthy pregnancies, to position themselves during labor to reduce complications, and to use plant-based medicines to manage pain and prevent infection. Some archaeological sites show evidence of specialized birthing areas, carefully chosen locations that offered protection from predators while providing access to clean water and medicinal plants. Archaeological evidence suggests that babies who showed signs of serious defect, who were born during times of extreme food scarcity, or who were simply too weak to survive the harsh conditions, were sometimes abandoned or killed. This sounds horrific to modern parents, but for prehistoric mothers, it was often a choice between losing one child or losing the entire family. Predators could snatch infants from their mother's arms. Archaeological sites show evidence of infant remains that suggest death from hypothermia, malnutrition, disease, and predation. The mothers who successfully raised children to adulthood had to protect them from all of these threats simultaneously. Children weren't gradually introduced to the dangers of their work. They were immersed in survival training from the moment they could walk. Archaeological evidence suggests that even toddlers were taught to recognize the calls of dangerous animals, to identify poisonous plants, and to hide silently when predators approached. These weren't objects designed for pure entertainment. They were miniature tools and weapons designed to teach children essential survival skills. Tiny spears, small knives, and child-sized hunting implements have been found at sites across the world. Children were learning to kill before they learned to speak in complete sentences. They learned to identify which plants were safe to eat, which water sources were clean, how to find shelter quickly, and how to make fire. These weren't optional skills. They were requirements for survival that could mean the difference between life and death. The psychological toll of this harsh upbringing was immense. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric children experienced levels of stress and trauma that would be considered severe by modern standards. Skeletal remains of children show signs of chronic stress, malnutrition, and physical abuse. But this wasn't cruelty. It was preparation for a world that would show them no mercy. They exposed them to cold and heat to build tolerance. They gradually reduced food portions to teach them to survive on minimal nutrition. They subjected them to frightening situations to build courage and quick thinking. Children who couldn't adapt to these harsh conditions often didn't survive to adulthood. Children weren't just raised by their biological mothers. They were raised by entire groups, with multiple adults taking responsibility for their survival education. This meant that children who lost their mothers still had chances for survival, but it also meant that they could be abandoned by the entire group if they proved to be liability. Archaeological evidence shows that some prehistoric societies practiced what we might call selection pressure on their children. Children who showed exceptional survival skills were given more resources and attention. Those who struggled were gradually marginalized and sometimes abandoned. This wasn't based on love or family bonds. It was based on cold survival calculations. Mothers had to make impossible choices about food allocation, often giving their children barely enough to survive while reserving the best food for the adults who could hunt and gather. Children who couldn't keep up with the group's nutritional demands were often left behind. But prehistoric mothers also developed remarkable innovations for keeping their children fed. They learned to pre-chew food for infants, to create nutritious gruels from available plants, and to store emergency food supplies specifically for children. Some archaeological sites show evidence of specialized child feeding implements, suggesting that mothers invested significant time and resources in developing feeding strategies. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric mothers developed elaborate systems for keeping children safe from the numerous predators that shared their environment. They created child-carrying devices that kept infants close to their bodies, established sleeping arrangements that protected children from night attacks, and developed early warning systems that could alert the group to approaching danger. Some of the most fascinating archaeological evidence comes from cave sites where families lived for extended periods. These caves often show evidence of child-proofing measures that seem remarkably modern. Barriers to prevent falls, secure storage for dangerous tools, and designated safe areas where children could play without risking injury. Prehistoric mothers were innovating child safety thousands of years before we had the luxury of modern safety equipment. Archaeological evidence shows that children died from infections, parasites, malnutrition, and diseases that we can barely identify today. Mothers had to watch their children suffer and die from conditions that would be easily treatable with modern medicine. The psychological impact of repeatedly losing children shaped prehistoric motherhood in profound ways. They learned to identify and treat common childhood ailments using plant-based medicines, to perform basic surgical procedures, and to provide palliative care for dying children. Some archaeological sites show evidence of medicinal plant stores that seem specifically designed for treating children's illnesses. Archaeological evidence suggests that children were sometimes weaned suddenly when food became scarce, or when the mother became pregnant. This wasn't a gradual, gentle process. It was an immediate shift from dependence to self-sufficiency that many children couldn't survive. The education of prehistoric children went beyond survival skills to include complex social and cultural knowledge. Mothers taught their children the group's history, its territorial boundaries, its social hierarchies, and its survival strategies. This education was passed down through generations, with mothers serving as the primary repository of cultural knowledge. The pressure to master essential skills was constant, and failure could mean death not just for the child, but for the entire group. Prehistoric mothers had to balance nurturing their children with preparing them for a world that would show no mercy. The sleeping arrangements for prehistoric families reveal the constant tension between protection and survival. Archaeological evidence suggests that children often slept in the center of family groups, surrounded by adults who could protect them from predators. But these arrangements also meant that crying children could attract predators to the entire group, creating conflicts between individual family needs and group survival. Archaeological evidence suggests that they used various methods to suppress crying, including the use of natural sedatives, physical restraint, and even temporary separation from the group. These techniques seem harsh by modern standards, but they were often the difference between life and death for the entire family. The games and play activities of prehistoric children were designed to teach survival skill, while providing some emotional relief from the harsh realities. Archaeological sites show evidence of games that taught hunting skill, tracking ability, and group cooperation. Even play was a form of education in the brutal realities of prehistoric life. Burial sites often show mothers and children interred together, suggesting that these bonds persisted even after death. On the other hand, the harsh realities of prehistoric life often required mothers to make decisions that seem emotionally cold by modern standards. The loss of children was a constant reality for prehistoric mothers. Archaeological evidence suggests that most mothers lost at least one child, and many lost multiple children. This repeated trauma shaped prehistoric motherhood in ways that are difficult for modern parents to understand. These mothers had to balance emotional investment in their children with the practical recognition that many of them would not survive. They created support systems with other mothers, developed coping mechanisms for dealing with loss, and maintained hope for the future even in the face of overwhelming odds. The emotional bonds between prehistoric mothers and their children were both stronger and more fragile than modern parent-child relationships. Archaeological evidence suggests that mothers who lost children often carried personal items or remains of their deceased children for years after death. Some burial sites show evidence of mothers who were interred with objects that belonged to their lost children, suggesting that these emotional bonds persisted even after death. Mothers had to teach their children not just to speak, but to communicate silently when necessary. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric groups developed complex systems of hand signals, body language, and even subtle vocalizations that could convey important information without alerting predators. Children who couldn't master these communication systems often didn't survive. The seasonal changes brought different challenges for prehistoric mothers. During harsh winters, they had to keep their children warm and fed when resources were scarce. During spring floods, they had to protect them from rushing water and unstable ground. During summer droughts, they had to find ways to keep them hydrated, and each season brought its own life-threatening challenges that required specific survival strategies. Archaeological sites show evidence of seasonal child mortality patterns, with different times of year being particularly dangerous for children. Winter months often show higher rates of child death from cold and starvation, while summer months show increased deaths from dehydration and heat exposure. Prehistoric mothers had to adapt their child-rearing strategies constantly to match these seasonal dangers. The migration patterns of prehistoric groups created additional challenges for mothers with children. Archaeological evidence suggests that some groups traveled hundreds of miles seasonally, following game herds or seeking better climates. Mothers had to carry their children during these migrations, often while pregnant with their next child. The physical demands of these journeys were enormous, and many children didn't survive the constant travel. Some prehistoric mothers developed innovative solutions for transporting their children migrations. Archaeological sites show evidence of specialized carrying devices, slings, and even early forms of portable shelter designed specifically for protecting children travel. These innovations required significant time and resources to create, but they were essential for child survival during group movements. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric mothers taught their children to recognize not just the sounds of dangerous animals, but also the subtle changes in bird calls, insect sounds, and even wind patterns that could indicate approaching threats. This environmental awareness was literally a matter of life and death for prehistoric children. Archaeological sites show evidence of weapons scaled down to child size, suggesting that mothers were teaching their children to defend themselves as soon as they could hold a tool. This wasn't just theoretical training. Skeletal remains of children show evidence of injuries from both practicing with weapons and using them in actual life-threatening situations. Many of our modern parenting instincts, our protective behaviors, and our educational approaches can be traced back to the survival strategies developed by prehistoric mothers. They laid the foundation for human child-rearing practices that have enabled our species to survive and thrive despite countless challenges. We're exploring the hidden truths of our ancestors' lives, revealing both the incredible challenges they faced and the remarkable solutions developed. Like this video, share it with someone who'd find it interesting, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.